What is the mind made of? A question that changes everything. Right now, as you read these words, something extraordinary is happening inside your skull. Billions of neurons are firing in precise patterns. Electrochemical signals are racing through neural pathways at hundreds of miles per hour, and somehow, through some process no one fully understands, these physical events are creating you. Your thoughts, your feelings, your sense of being alive. But here's what keeps scientists awake at night. How does wet meat create consciousness? How do atoms arranged in a particular way suddenly begin to experience the color red, the taste of chocolate, the ache of heartbreak? How does the universe become aware of itself? You've spent every moment of your existence inside your mind, yet it remains more alien to you than the surface of Mars. You don't know where your next thought will come from. You can't explain why you prefer vanilla to strawberry. You have no idea why you fell in love with the person you did, why certain songs make you cry, or why you sometimes sabotage your own happiness. The mind is the only tool we have to understand reality, yet it may be the least understood thing in reality itself. Scientists can map galaxies billions of light years away with stunning precision, but they cannot tell you with certainty where your sense of self resides or whether your memories are real. We can split atoms and splice genes, but we cannot explain how you experience the simple sensation of being. This book is an expedition into that hidden universe. We're going to explore the landscape of consciousness, navigate the architecture of emotions, investigate the fragile machinery of memory, and confront the possibility that everything you think you know about yourself might be an elaborate illusion constructed by neural circuitry you'll never directly experience. Because the mind isn't just another topic to study. It's the lens through which everything else is known. Understanding it changes how you understand everything else, including who you are. Let's begin where all journeys into consciousness must begin, with wonder at the sheer impossibility of your own existence. The hidden universe inside you. Stand outside on a clear night and look up at the stars. The universe stretches before you in all its incomprehensible vastness. Hundreds of billions of galaxies, each containing hundreds of billions of stars, scattered across distances that make human lifespans seem like quantum flickers. It's humbling, it's terrifying, it's magnificent. Now consider this. The 3 pounds of wrinkled tissue inside your skull may be more complex than all of that cosmic architecture combined. Your brain contains roughly 86 billion neurons, each connected to thousands of others through trillions of synapses. If you tried to count every synaptic connection in a single human brain at a rate of 1 per second, it would take you over 30 million years. The number of possible neural configurations in your brain exceeds the number of atoms in the known universe. Think about that. The possible states of your mind outnumber the possible arrangements of physical matter in all of space. But raw numbers don't capture the real mystery. Computers have billions of transistors performing trillions of calculations. Yet no computer has ever felt bored, or fallen in love, or wondered about its own existence. Something happens in biological brains that transforms mere computation into experience, mere information processing into inner life. The problem nobody can solve. In 1994, philosopher David Chalmers identified what he called the hard problem of consciousness. It's easy to explain how the brain processes visual information or coordinates movement. These are problems of mechanism, of cause and effect. But explaining how and why processing information feels like something from the inside, that's the hard problem. Consider the color red. When you see something red, light of a certain wavelength hits your retina, triggering a cascade of neural signals that travel to your visual cortex. Scientists can track every step of this process with stunning precision. They can show you exactly which neurons fire, which neurotransmitters are released, which brain regions activate. But none of that explains the subjective experience of redness, that particular qualia, that specific sensation of what it's like to see red. You could, in theory, know everything about how brains process color information without ever experiencing color yourself. A person blind from birth could become an expert neuroscientist, able to describe the complete neural mechanics of color vision. But the first time they saw red would still teach them something new, something that couldn't be captured in any physical description. This is why consciousness remains resistant to scientific explanation. We can correlate it with brain activity, map its neural signatures, even manipulate it with drugs and electrical stimulation. But we cannot bridge the gap between objective physical processes and subjective experience. We cannot explain how electricity becomes ecstasy, how chemistry becomes creativity, how neurons become nostalgia. The paradox of self-investigation. Here's where things get even stranger. You are using your mind to try to understand your mind. It's like trying to see your own face without a mirror, or like a knife trying to cut itself. The instrument of investigation is also the object being investigated. This creates peculiar limitations. When you introspect, when you look inside your own mind, you're not accessing the underlying machinery. You don't feel your neurons firing. You don't perceive the neurotransmitters flooding your synapses. You only experience the finished products, thoughts, feelings, perceptions. It's like watching a movie without ever seeing the projector, the film, or the light source. You see only what appears on the screen. This is why most of what your brain does remains completely invisible to you. Right now, your brain is regulating your heartbeat, monitoring oxygen levels, coordinating muscle movements, filtering sensory information, maintaining balance, processing language, accessing memories, and performing thousands of other operations, all without your awareness or permission. Consciousness is like a tiny spotlight beam moving across a vast dark stage, illuminating only a fraction of the performance. The 3-pound universe. Despite these mysteries, we do know some remarkable things about this hidden universe. Your brain, representing only 2% of your body weight, consumes 20% of your energy. It generates about 23 watts of power when awake, enough to light a small bulb. Every time you learn something new, your brain physically changes, forming new neural connections and strengthening existing ones. Memories aren't stored in single locations, but distributed across networks, making them both resilient and vulnerable to distortion. Your brain is also incredibly lazy in the best possible way. It's constantly looking for shortcuts, patterns, and ways to conserve energy. This is why habits form, why stereotypes persist, and why changing your mind about deeply held beliefs feels so difficult. Your brain has literally structured itself around those beliefs, carving neural pathways that make certain thoughts flow more easily than others. The architecture is organized in layers, like sedimentary rock showing the history of evolution. Deep within, you have ancient structures you share with reptiles, the parts that handle basic survival, breathing, arousal. Wrapped around that, mammalian structures governing emotion, social bonding, memory. And finally, the enormous cerebral cortex, especially the frontal lobes, that give humans their distinctive cognitive abilities: abstract reasoning, language, planning, self-reflection. This layered structure means you literally have multiple minds operating simultaneously, often with conflicting agendas. The part that craves the donut conflicts with the part that remembers your health goals. The part that feels insulted wants to lash out, while the part that models social consequences urges restraint. You are not a unified self, but a parliament of competing impulses, and consciousness is the arena where these conflicts play out. Why this matters to you? You might wonder why any of this matters. After all, you've been successfully using your mind your entire life without understanding how it works, just as people walked for millions of years without understanding biomechanics. But here's the truth. Understanding your mind changes how you use it. Recognizing that your memories are reconstructive, not reproductive, makes you more humble about your certainty. Knowing that your unconscious mind processes information before your conscious awareness catches up makes you less judgmental about your automatic reactions. Understanding that your sense of self is constructed moment by moment makes you more flexible about your identity and less imprisoned by your past. Moreover, in an age of information overload, attention manipulation, and increasingly sophisticated attempts to influence your thoughts and behaviors, understanding how your mind works is a form of self-defense. Advertisers, politicians, tech companies, and media organizations all employ sophisticated psychological techniques designed to bypass your rational faculties and trigger automatic responses. Knowledge of these mechanisms is the only reliable protection. The mind is not just an academic curiosity. It's the instrument through which you'll experience every moment of your life, make every decision, form every relationship, and create every accomplishment. The better you understand it, the better you can work with it rather than against it. The journey ahead. In the chapters that follow, we'll explore this hidden universe from multiple angles. We'll examine the ancient debate about whether mind and brain are identical or distinct. We'll investigate how consciousness works and why it exists at all. We'll trace the birth of thoughts, map the architecture of emotions, and descend into the unconscious basement where so much of your mental life unfolds without your knowledge. We'll confront uncomfortable truths, that your memories are unreliable, that your decisions are less rational than you believe, that your sense of self may be an elaborate fiction. But we'll also discover extraordinary capacities, the ability to imagine worlds that don't exist, to feel emotions that connect us across vast differences, to create meaning in an indifferent universe. By the end, you won't have all the answers, no one does, but you'll have something perhaps more valuable, better questions. You'll see your own mind with fresh eyes, recognizing both its limitations and its astonishing capabilities. You'll understand yourself not as a fixed thing, but as an ongoing process, not as a simple entity, but a complex system, not as a finished product, but a work in progress. The journey into the mind is ultimately a journey into yourself, and there is no more important expedition you can undertake. The mind, the brain, or something more. For thousands of years, humans have sensed a fundamental division within themselves. We are physical bodies subject to gravity, hunger, pain, and decay. Yet we also have an inner life, thoughts, feelings, hopes, dreams that seems to exist in a different realm entirely. Ideas have no weight. Love cannot be measured with calipers. You cannot surgically remove someone's Tuesday. This apparent duality has generated one of philosophy's oldest and most stubborn questions. Is the mind simply what the brain does, or is it something separate that somehow interacts with the brain? Are mental events ultimately physical events, or do they belong to a different category of existence? This isn't merely academic philosophy. Your answer to this question shapes how you think about free will, moral responsibility, life after death, artificial intelligence, and what it means to be human. It determines whether you believe downloading consciousness to computers could ever work, whether brain damage can destroy the real you, and whether there's any part of you that might survive physical death. The materialist position. You are your brain. The materialist view, also called physicalism, holds that minds are what brains do. Mental states are brain states. Thoughts are patterns of neural activity. Consciousness is an emergent property of sufficiently complex information processing. There is no ghost in the machine because there is only the machine. This position has compelling evidence on its side. Every mental state we can identify correlates with specific brain activity. Damage specific brain regions and you lose specific mental functions. Alter brain chemistry with drugs and you alter consciousness, mood, perception, and personality. If a stroke destroys your language centers, you lose the ability to speak, not because your immaterial mind still has language that it simply cannot express, but because language itself resides in those neural circuits. Consider split brain patients. When the corpus callosum, the bundle of fibers connecting the two brain hemispheres, is severed to treat severe epilepsy, something fascinating happens. The two hemispheres begin to exhibit different preferences, knowledge, and abilities. One might be able to name objects while the other cannot. One might believe in God while the other doesn't. Are there now two minds where there was one? The materialist explanation is straightforward. Consciousness emerges from neural architecture, and when you divide the architecture, you divide consciousness. Neuroscience has made stunning progress mapping mental functions to brain structures. We know that damage to the hippocampus impairs new memory formation. Injury to the ventromedial prefrontal cortex disrupts emotional regulation and decision-making. Stimulation of specific regions can trigger vivid memories, alter moral judgments, or even out-of-body experiences. The correlation between brain and mind appears total and systematic. Moreover, evolutionary biology provides a compelling narrative. Consciousness didn't drop from the sky fully formed. It evolved gradually through natural selection as brains became more complex. Simple organisms have simple forms of awareness. More complex nervous systems support more sophisticated mental life. Human consciousness is the pinnacle of this process, for now, but it's continuous with animal consciousness, not fundamentally different in kind. From this perspective, the hard problem of consciousness is simply a hard scientific problem, not a metaphysical mystery. We don't yet understand how brains generate subjective experience, just as 19th century scientists didn't understand how biological molecules could store and transmit genetic information. But it's a problem of scientific ignorance, not a fundamental barrier requiring us to invoke non-physical substances. The dualist position, mind and matter are different. Dualism, the view that mind and body are distinct kinds of things, has an equally long and distinguished history. René Descartes famously argued that he could doubt the existence of his body, but not the existence of his thinking self. Therefore, mind and body must be different substances. Body is extended in space, divisible, mechanical. Mind is non-spatial, indivisible, conscious. The intuitive appeal of dualism is powerful. Your thoughts don't seem to have location, color, or weight.
Mathematical truths appear to exist independently of any physical implementation. When you imagine a sunset, the imagined sunset isn't located in any particular cubic centimeter of your brain. Consciousness seems fundamentally different from the brain that supposedly produces it. Dualists point to the explanatory gap that materialists acknowledge but cannot close. You can describe every physical fact about pain, the tissue damage, the nerve impulses, the brain activation, without capturing what pain feels like. The subjective, qualitative aspect of experience, what philosophers call qualia, seems to resist physical explanation. Knowing all the physical facts about color processing doesn't convey what it's like to see red. Some philosophers argue that consciousness has causal powers that cannot be reduced to physical processes. When you decide to raise your arm because you want to wave at a friend, your desire, a mental state, appears to cause your arm movement, a physical event. How can a non-physical desire cause physical motion unless mind and body can interact despite being different kinds of things? Property dualism offers a middle ground. Perhaps there's only one kind of substance, physical, but it has two fundamentally different kinds of properties: physical properties like mass and charge, and mental properties like consciousness and intentionality. These mental properties emerge from but cannot be reduced to physical properties, just as liquidity emerges from water molecules but cannot be found in any individual molecule. The problem of interaction. The Achilles heel of traditional dualism has always been interaction. If mind and brain are truly different kinds of substances, how do they influence each other? When you decide to eat chocolate, mental event, how does that cause your hand to reach for chocolate, physical event? When you stub your toe, physical event, how does that cause pain, mental event? Descartes notoriously proposed the pineal gland as the point of interaction, but this simply pushes the problem back a step. How does an immaterial mind interface with a physical gland? It's like asking how a software program could move a physical object without any hardware mediating between them. This problem doesn't trouble materialists, for whom mental causation is just neural causation by another name. But it presents a serious challenge to traditional substance dualism. If non-physical minds can push around physical matter, they seem to violate physical laws like conservation of energy. If they can't push around physical matter, they become causally impotent, and then why do we have them? The emergence argument. Modern neuroscience has complicated the picture in interesting ways. We now understand that complex systems can exhibit properties that their components don't have individually. Water molecules aren't wet, but collections of them are. Individual neurons aren't conscious, but networks of them are. Perhaps consciousness is an emergent property, something that arises from complex organization but cannot be reduced to or predicted from lower-level physical descriptions. This emergentist view tries to honor both materialist and dualist intuitions. Yes, consciousness depends entirely on physical brains, no brain, no consciousness, but consciousness also has features that cannot be captured by purely physical descriptions. The whole is more than the sum of its parts, not because some non-physical substance gets added, but because organization and relationship create genuinely new properties. Critics of emergence argue it's either trivial, just a way of talking about complex physical systems, or mysterious, introducing irreducible properties that are effectively dualist. Defenders respond that emergence is ubiquitous in nature. Think of how individual atoms organize into living cells, or how individual neurons organize into minds capable of wondering about their own existence. The emergent information theory. Some contemporary theories try to bridge the explanatory gap by identifying specific physical signatures of consciousness. Integrated information theory, developed by neuroscientist Giulio Tononi, proposes that consciousness is identical to integrated information, information that cannot be reduced to independent parts. According to this theory, consciousness arises when a system both differentiates, can be in many possible states, and integrates. Those states are interdependent. A photodiode can differentiate between light and dark, but doesn't integrate information, so it's not conscious. A brain both differentiates between millions of possible states and integrates them into unified experiences, so it's highly conscious.
This approach suggests consciousness isn't unique to biological brains. Any system with sufficient integration and differentiation, whether biological, silicon-based, or something else entirely, would be conscious to some degree. This raises profound questions about artificial intelligence, animal consciousness, and even whether the universe itself might be conscious. The panpsychist alternative. Growing numbers of philosophers and scientists are considering an even more radical possibility, panpsychism, the view that consciousness is a fundamental feature of reality, like mass or charge. Perhaps all matter has some form of proto-consciousness, and complex consciousness arises when these simple conscious elements are organized in particular ways. This sounds crazy at first. Are electrons conscious? Is my chair having experiences? But panpsychists argue it solves the hard problem by dissolving it. If consciousness is fundamental rather than emergent, we don't need to explain how it arises from non-conscious matter. We only need to explain how simple forms of consciousness combine into complex forms, the combination problem. Panpsychism also addresses the seeming arbitrariness of where consciousness appears. Why do brains generate consciousness but computers don't? Or do they? Why humans but not plants? If consciousness is fundamental and ubiquitous, these become questions of degree and organization rather than mysterious thresholds. Critics object that panpsychism doesn't really explain anything. It just relocates the mystery from how do brains generate consciousness to what is this fundamental conscious property of matter? And the combination problem, how do billions of micro-consciousnesses combine into your unified consciousness, may be just as hard as the original hard problem. What this means for you. You've probably noticed that none of these positions is entirely satisfying. Materialism struggles to explain subjective experience. Dualism struggles to explain mind-body interaction. Emergence might be hiding rather than solving the problem. Panpsychism seems to multiply mysteries rather than resolve them. Perhaps that's the point. The mind-brain relationship may be one of those questions that reveals the limits of human understanding. Just as you can't see your own eyes without a mirror, perhaps you can't fully comprehend the relationship between physical and mental using mental faculties that are themselves part of the mystery. But practical implications exist regardless of which theoretical position's correct. If materialism is true, then altering your brain chemistry and neural patterns is the only way to change your mental life. Meditation, therapy, and lifestyle changes work by physically restructuring your brain. If dualism is true, then mental practices might have power independent of neural changes. Perhaps consciousness can shape matter in ways that bottom-up neuroscience cannot fully explain. For most purposes, we can adopt a pragmatic stance. Mental and physical influence each other bidirectionally, regardless of whether they're ultimately the same thing or different things that interact. You don't need to resolve ancient metaphysical debates to benefit from understanding how your thoughts affect your emotions, how your brain health affects your mental clarity, or how changing your behavior changes your consciousness. What we cannot do is remain neutral. Your implicit beliefs about mind and brain shape how you approach mental health, moral responsibility, personal identity, and the possibility of artificial consciousness. Better to examine these beliefs explicitly than to be governed by them unconsciously. The mystery of mind and matter isn't a puzzle to be solved once and for all. It's a question to be lived with, explored from multiple angles, and allowed to deepen your sense of wonder at the strange fact that the universe has created beings capable of contemplating their own existence.
The light that turns reality on. Right now, you're conscious. You're aware of these words, aware of your surroundings, aware of your own awareness. This seems utterly ordinary. So ordinary that we barely notice it. Yet consciousness is the most extraordinary phenomenon in the known universe.
Before consciousness, there was no color, no sound, no pain, no pleasure. There were electromagnetic waves of various frequencies, but no red. There were compression waves in the air, but no melody. There were neural damage signals, but no suffering. Consciousness is what transforms objective physical processes into subjective experience. It's what makes there be something it's like to be you. Without consciousness, the universe would still exist. Galaxies would still spiral, stars would still burn, water would still flow. But none of it would be experienced. It would all unfold in darkness. Not the darkness you see when you close your eyes, but absolute emptiness. No witness, no experience, no inner life. Consciousness is what lights everything up from the inside. The puzzle of awareness. Scientists can explain many things about brains. They can tell you how visual information gets processed, how memories get stored, how decisions get made. But they cannot tell you why any of this is accompanied by experience. Why doesn't it all happen in the dark? Why is there something it feels like to see red, or taste chocolate, or feel heartbroken? This is sometimes called the zombie problem. Conceivably, you could build a perfect physical duplicate of yourself, same atoms, same neural patterns, same behavior, that processes information identically to you but has no inner experience. This philosophical zombie would say, "I'm conscious," and behave exactly as you do, but inside would be empty. Why are you conscious while your zombie twin isn't? The puzzle deepens when you consider that most mental processing happens unconsciously. Your brain continuously processes vastly more information than ever reaches awareness. Right now, you're not conscious of the feeling of your clothes against your skin, though you are now that I've mentioned it, the slight variations in air pressure, the continuous neural calculations maintaining your balance, or the complex linguistic processing that lets you understand these words. Consciousness is like a spotlight beam sweeping across a vast dark stage. Most of the action happens in darkness. Only a tiny fraction reaches the illuminated circle. What determines what gets lit up? Why does anything get lit up at all? The varieties of conscious experience. Consciousness isn't a single thing, but a spectrum of different states and qualities. When you're deeply focused on a task, consciousness narrows to a laser beam. When you're daydreaming, it diffuses into a dreamy haze. In deep sleep, it disappears entirely, though dreams bring a different, stranger form of consciousness. Altered states reveal just how variable consciousness can be. Psychedelic drugs can dissolve the boundary between self and world, making you feel merged with everything. Meditation can produce states of pure awareness without particular content. Consciousness conscious of itself without being conscious of anything in particular. General anesthesia can completely switch consciousness off, leaving a gap in experience where hours of surgery leave no trace. Each of these states reveals consciousness to be not a simple on-off switch, but a complex, multidimensional phenomenon with volume, bandwidth, clarity, unity, and many other features that can vary independently. You can be intensely conscious with narrow focus, or broadly conscious with diffuse awareness. You can be conscious without self-consciousness, as young children and perhaps animals are, or self-conscious to the point of paralyzing self-awareness. The unity of consciousness. One of consciousness's most striking features is its unity. Right now, you're experiencing a unified field of awareness. Words, surroundings, thoughts, feelings, all integrated into a single coherent experience. You're not having multiple separate experiences, you're having one experience with multiple aspects. This unity is remarkable, given that your brain processes different types of information in different regions. Visual processing happens in the occipital lobe, language in the temporal and frontal lobes, emotional processing in the limbic system.
Yet these separate processes somehow get bound together into unified conscious experience. This is called the binding problem. How does the brain create unity out of diversity? Split brain research suggests this unity is more constructed than it appears. When the connection between hemispheres is severed, each hemisphere can support separate streams of consciousness that don't know about each other. The left hemisphere might see a chicken claw and choose a matching picture of a chicken. The right hemisphere might see a snowy scene and choose a matching shovel. When asked to explain both choices, the left hemisphere, which controls speech but didn't see the snow, confabulates. Oh, the shovel is for cleaning out the chicken coop. This suggests that the unity of consciousness depends on neural integration. Separate brain regions or neural networks separated by damage can support separate islands of awareness. The unified consciousness you normally experience requires constant communication across brain regions. Attention, the spotlight of awareness. Not everything you perceive reaches consciousness. Attention selects which information gets amplified into awareness. This selective focusing is both powerful and limiting. It lets you concentrate deeply on one thing by filtering out distractions, but it also means you miss vast amounts of available information. The famous invisible gorilla experiment demonstrates this dramatically. People watching a video of others passing basketballs, counting the passes, often completely fail to notice someone in a gorilla suit walking through the scene. Their attention is so focused on counting that the unexpected stimulus, though clearly visible, never reaches consciousness. Attention can be directed voluntarily. You decide to focus on these words. Or captured involuntarily. A loud noise suddenly seizes your attention. Advertisers, app designers, and media creators constantly compete for your attention because they understand something crucial. Controlling attention means controlling consciousness. Where your attention goes, your consciousness follows, and your life follows your consciousness. This makes attention management one of the most important life skills. You cannot be conscious of everything, so learning what to pay attention to and what to ignore shapes the quality of your conscious experience, and therefore the quality of your life. The hard problem revisited. We keep returning to the hard problem because it really is the central mystery. Why is there experience at all? Many theories try to answer this. Global workspace theory suggests consciousness arises when information becomes globally available across brain systems. Unconscious processes compete for access to a global workspace. Consciousness is what wins and gets broadcast widely. This explains which information becomes conscious, but not why globally broadcast information feels like something. Higher-order theories propose that consciousness requires thoughts about thoughts. You're conscious of pain when you have a thought about your pain experience. This neatly explains why we might be more conscious than animals if they lack the capacity for higher-order thoughts, but struggles with the question of what makes higher-order thoughts themselves conscious. Predictive processing theories suggest consciousness reflects the brain's ongoing attempt to predict sensory input. You're conscious of surprises, things that violate predictions. This element framework explains many features of consciousness, but again, doesn't fully explain why violated predictions feel like anything. Perhaps these theories aren't competing, but describing different aspects of consciousness. Just as you need multiple perspectives to fully describe a three-dimensional object, perhaps consciousness requires multiple theoretical frameworks to capture its full nature. The function of consciousness. If consciousness is so mysterious, why did it evolve? What does it do? One possibility, nothing. Perhaps consciousness is an epiphenomenon, a byproduct of complex information processing that doesn't actually do any causal work.
like the whistle of a steam engine which accompanies but doesn't contribute to the engine's operation. This seems hard to swallow. Evolution is ruthlessly efficient at eliminating useless features. If consciousness served no function, why did it arise and persist?
Moreover, it seems obvious that consciousness makes a difference. You behave differently when conscious than when unconscious. Conscious deliberation affects decisions. Conscious suffering motivates behavior changes. More plausible theories suggest consciousness enables flexible, adaptive behavior that unconscious processing cannot achieve. Consciousness allows you to integrate information from multiple sources to make novel decisions, mentally simulate scenarios before acting, imagination, override automatic responses with deliberate choice, form complex plans requiring consideration of multiple factors, engage in abstract reasoning and creative problem-solving, experience emotions that motivate long-term goals. According to these functional theories, consciousness evolved because organisms that could consciously deliberate, imagine alternatives, and flexibly respond to novel situations outcompeted organisms that could only react automatically. The mystery of subjective quality. Even if we understand consciousness's function and neural basis, the mystery of subjective quality remains. Why does pain feel painful rather than pleasurable? Why does red look red rather than sounding like a trumpet? These seem to be arbitrary assignments. There's nothing inherent that doesn't exist. There aren't two things, brain state and conscious experience, mysteriously connected. There's one thing with two aspects. Just as water can be described as H2O molecules, objective, or as wet, clear liquid, subjective, consciousness might be brain activity described from the inside. Living consciously. Understanding consciousness, even incompletely, transforms how you inhabit your conscious life. Recognizing that attention shapes consciousness encourages mindfulness about where you direct your attention. Understanding that consciousness integrates diverse neural processes makes you appreciate how fragile and constructed your sense of unified awareness really is. Knowing that much happens unconsciously invites curiosity about the hidden processes shaping your experience. Most importantly, appreciating consciousness's mystery restores a sense of wonder about the simple fact of being aware. You've lived inside consciousness your entire life, perhaps taking it for granted as fish take water for granted. But consciousness is the most improbable, most extraordinary phenomenon in nature. Every moment of awareness is a small miracle. The universe knowing itself, matter experiencing itself, emptiness somehow filled with the light of experience. Tomorrow morning when you wake up, you'll experience something billions of years of cosmic and biological evolution were required to create. Consciousness returning, the lights coming back on, reality becoming real again through your subjective experience of it. That's worth noticing. That's worth treasuring. Because without consciousness, nothing else would matter, literally. There would be no one to whom anything mattered. The birth of a thought. Where do thoughts come from? Right now, a thought just appeared in your consciousness, perhaps a reaction to that question, a memory, or a distraction. But where was it before it appeared? You didn't consciously create it. You didn't assemble it from parts. It simply arose, fully formed in your awareness. This is one of the strangest aspects of mental life. Thoughts happen to you rather than being done by you. You can't choose your next thought before you have it. That would require already having the thought you're trying to create. You're more like a witness to your thoughts than their author. They bubble up from somewhere beyond your conscious control, and only after they arrive do you claim them as yours. Understanding how this happens, how electrochemical activity becomes semantic content, how neural firing becomes meaningful thought, takes us to the frontier of neuroscience and deep into the mystery of mind itself. The neural foundation. Let's start with the physical basis. Thoughts emerge from patterns of activity across networks of neurons. A single neuron is essentially a biological switch that either fires or doesn't based on the inputs it receives. When a neuron fires, it sends an electrical signal down its axon, releasing neurotransmitters across synapses to influence other neurons. That's it. That's the basic unit. Now scale up. Your brain contains roughly 86 billion of these switches, each connected to thousands of others. The resulting network has more possible states than there are particles in the observable universe. And thoughts are patterns in this network, not firing of individual neurons, but coordinated firing across distributed neural assemblies. When you think coffee, no single neuron represents coffee. Instead, a specific pattern activates across multiple brain regions. Visual areas, what coffee looks like. Olfactory areas, its smell. Motor areas, the movement of drinking. Emotional centers, the pleasure or alertness associated with it. Language areas, the word coffee, and so on. This distributed pattern is coffee in your brain. Different thoughts correspond to different patterns. Coffee is one pattern, justice another, my grandmother another. Learning means strengthening connections that make certain patterns more likely to activate together. Remembering means reactivating a pattern that formed previously. Thinking means allowing patterns to flow from one to another, following learned associations and logical relationships. The moment before a thought. But this still doesn't explain the subjective experience of a thought appearing in consciousness. Where does the thought exist before you're aware of it? Research on this question reveals something unsettling. Your brain makes decisions before you're consciously aware of them. In famous experiments by Benjamin Libet, participants were asked to note the exact moment they decided to flex their wrist while their brain activity was monitored. Remarkably, a specific pattern of brain activity, the readiness potential, appeared several hundred milliseconds before participants reported consciously deciding to move. The brain was preparing for movement before consciousness registered any decision. More recent studies find even longer delays. Some research suggests specific brain activity patterns can predict a person's decision up to 10 seconds before they report consciously making that decision. 10 seconds is an eternity in neural time, thousands of neural processing cycles. This suggests that by the time you consciously have a thought or make a decision, your brain has already done the heavy lifting. Consciousness arrives late to the party and then takes credit for what unconscious processes already set in motion. This doesn't necessarily mean free will is an illusion. We'll explore that later. But it does radically revise our understanding of how thoughts arrive.
They don't originate in consciousness, they arrive in consciousness after being constructed elsewhere in the neural machinery. The assembly line of thought. Think of thought generation as an assembly line you can't observe. Raw materials, sensory input, memories, emotions, biological states enter at one end. Unconscious processing sorts, combines, and transforms them. Finally, a finished product, a conscious thought, emerges at the other end.
Different types of thoughts use different assembly processes. Reactive thoughts arise rapidly from immediate stimuli. You see a snake and instantly think, danger. This involves quick pattern matching. Visual input matches stored patterns associated with threat, triggering thoughts of danger along with physiological fear responses. The whole process, from photons hitting your retina to conscious fearful thought, takes less than a second. Associative thoughts follow chains of connection. You smell fresh bread, which reminds you of your grandmother's kitchen, which reminds you of her storytelling, which reminds you of a particular fairy tale. Each thought activates related neural patterns, which in turn activate other patterns, creating a stream of consciousness following association networks your past experiences have carved. Analytical thoughts involve more deliberate processing. You're trying to solve a problem or understand something complex. This feels more effortful because it requires sustained activation of specific neural networks while inhibiting distracting patterns. Even here, though, impairment show that thinking continues without language, though it changes character. Visual thinking, emotional thinking, and problem solving can all proceed with minimal language. Einstein reportedly thought primarily in images and spatial relationships, only later translating his insights into words and mathematics. Yet, language enables certain kinds of thoughts that are difficult or impossible without it. Abstract concepts like justice, democracy, or infinity are hard to think about without words. Language lets you manipulate thoughts explicitly, examine them, negate them, combine them according to logical rules. It creates a kind of cognitive workspace where thoughts can be held, inspected, and transformed. The inner monologue also creates a sense of authorship over thoughts. When you think in words, it feels like you are generating the thought through speech, even though the words arise no more voluntarily than nonverbal thoughts. This linguistic layer adds to the illusion that conscious you is the source of thoughts rather than their recipient. The speed of thought. Thoughts arrive remarkably quickly. You can have several thoughts per second, each one arriving fully formed. This is far faster than you could consciously construct them from components. It's also faster than most neural processes we can track. This speed suggests that thoughts aren't built from scratch each time, but selected from a vast repertoire of pre-existing patterns. Your brain doesn't construct the concept coffee anew each time. It has a stable neural pattern that, once triggered, activates rapidly. Thinking is more like selecting from a menu than composing from ingredients. But where does the triggering come from? What determines which thought arises next? This depends on multiple factors operating simultaneously. Context. Your current situation constrains relevant thoughts. Priming. Recent thoughts make related thoughts more likely. Goals. Active intentions bias thought content. Emotion. Mood influences which memories and associations activate.
Novelty. Unexpected stimuli capture attention and generate thoughts. Fatigue. Mental exhaustion affects thought quality and control. All these factors work together, mostly unconsciously, to determine the flow of conscious thoughts. You experience the result, the stream of consciousness, but not the complex calculus generating it. Intrusive thoughts and mental control. Sometimes unwanted thoughts arise despite your wishes.
You're trying to focus on work, but thoughts of conflict, craving, or anxiety keep intruding. Or you tell yourself, don't think about pink elephants, and immediately picture a pink elephant. This reveals the paradox of mental control. Trying not to think something requires thinking about it. Your monitoring system has to check whether you're thinking the forbidden thought, which means activating that thought's neural pattern. The very attempt at suppression makes the unwanted thought more likely to surface. This is why deliberate suppression rarely works. Better strategies accept that thoughts will arise spontaneously and focus on how you respond to them. In meditation, you practice noticing thoughts without following them. In cognitive therapy, you practice observing thoughts without believing them. The goal isn't to control which thoughts arise, that's largely impossible, but to control how you relate to the thoughts that do arise. Thought disorders and altered thinking. Mental illness often involves disordered thinking, revealing what normal thought generation requires. In schizophrenia, thought insertion makes people feel that thoughts are being placed in their mind from outside. This may reflect dysfunction in the neural systems that normally label thoughts as self-generated. In depression, thinking becomes negatively biased. Attention preferentially focuses on negative information, memories skew toward failures and losses, future projections turn pessimistic. This isn't voluntary pessimism, but a systematic bias in how thoughts are generated and selected. The neural networks have been reshaped by chronic stress or negative experience. Obsessive-compulsive disorder involves thoughts that loop repetitively despite efforts to dismiss them. The normal process by which one thought gives way to the next gets stuck, creating mental grooves that thoughts circle endlessly. This shows that thought flow requires not just activation of patterns, but inhibition of no longer relevant patterns, a process that can malfunction. These disorders aren't character flaws or choices. They're breakdowns in the unconscious machinery that generates thoughts. Understanding this reduces stigma and highlights that fixing disordered thinking often requires fixing the underlying neural systems through medication, therapy, or lifestyle changes that alter brain function. The emergence of novel thoughts. Perhaps the most mysterious aspect of thought is genuine novelty, thinking something you've never thought before. How does this happen if thoughts are patterns in neural networks shaped by past experience? The answer seems to involve recombination. Even novel thoughts are built from familiar elements combined in new ways. You've never seen a flying purple giraffe, but you can think about one by combining flying, purple, and giraffe, concepts you already have. True creativity involves making non-obvious combinations, finding connections between domains that seemed unrelated. This is why diverse experience fuels creativity. The more varied your neural patterns, the more potential combinations exist. It's also why relaxation helps creativity. Tight conscious control tends to follow well-worn pathways, while relaxed consciousness allows more random recombination. Some of the most significant thoughts in history came from such recombinations. Darwin combined Malthus's ideas about population pressure with observations of natural variation to conceive natural selection. Einstein combined Maxwell's equations with thought experiments about riding light beams to develop relativity. These weren't mystical inspirations, but novel connections between existing concepts. The gap between thought and action. One crucial feature of human thinking is the gap between thought and action. Most thoughts don't immediately trigger behavior.
You can think, "I'd like to punch that person," without punching them. This gap, requiring neural inhibition of automatic action, may be one of consciousness's most important functions. Animals with simpler nervous systems show tighter stimulus-response coupling. A simple reflex offers no gap. Touch something hot, instantly withdraw your hand. But complex thinking requires holding thoughts in mind without immediately acting on them, considering alternatives, imagining consequences.
This gap depends on prefrontal cortex function, the brain region that matured latest in human evolution and matures latest in individual development. Damage to prefrontal regions reduces the thought-action gap, producing impulsive behavior driven by whatever thought currently occupies consciousness. The gap also creates a space for something like free will. Even if thoughts arise unconsciously, you can still choose, to some degree, which thoughts to follow and which to ignore, to elaborate, and which to dismiss. This choosing happens mostly unconsciously too, but it creates meaningful variation in behavior that depends on cognitive processing rather than automatic reaction. Living with your thoughts. Understanding thought generation changes your relationship with your thoughts. Once you recognize that thoughts arise spontaneously rather than being consciously authored, you can hold them more lightly. You don't have to identify with every thought that passes through awareness. This is especially helpful with negative thoughts. When you think, "I'm worthless," you can recognize this as a thought arising from certain neural conditions, perhaps fatigue, stress, or depression-altered networks, rather than an objective truth about reality. The thought still arises, still feels bad, but you don't have to believe it or act on it. You can also become more curious about your thoughts. What triggered this thought? What thought is likely to follow? What does the pattern of my thoughts reveal about my concerns, values, and mental state? Thoughts become data about your inner life, rather than simply being your inner life. Finally, understanding that thought generation is mostly unconscious can reduce both pride and shame about your thoughts. You don't deserve full credit for brilliant insights, your unconscious did most of the work, nor full blame for disturbing thoughts. They arose from neural conditions beyond your control. What matters is not which thoughts arise, but what you do with them once they appear in consciousness. Why you feel what you feel. You're walking down a dark alley at night when you hear footsteps behind you. Instantly, your heart races, your muscles tense, your attention sharpens. Fear floods through you before you've consciously decided anything is dangerous. This happens so fast that you're feeling fear before you fully know why. Emotions are the mind's rapid response system, shortcuts that prepare you for action before slower conscious analysis finishes. They color every experience, drive countless decisions, and shape your sense of who you are. Yet most people understand emotions less well than they understand their smartphones. Where do emotions come from? Why do we have them? What are they made of? And why do you sometimes feel emotions that seem completely irrational or inappropriate? The ancient survival system. Emotions evolved because they solved survival problems. Long before humans developed language or abstract reasoning, we needed fast ways to respond to threats and opportunities. See a predator? Fear motivates escape before you waste time analyzing the situation. Find food? Pleasure motivates consumption. Face a rival? Anger mobilizes aggression. Lose a child? Grief motivates searching and discourages future risks. This is why emotions feel so physical. They aren't just thoughts about situations, they're whole body response patterns that prepare you for specific actions. Fear doesn't just make you think this is dangerous, it redirects blood to major muscles, releases stress hormones, heightens sensory vigilance, and creates an urgent impulse to escape. Your body is getting ready to run before your conscious mind finishes evaluating the threat. This ancient system operates largely beneath consciousness.
The amygdala, a small almond-shaped structure deep in your brain, constantly scans your environment for emotional significance, especially threat. It can trigger fear responses in 12 milliseconds, far faster than the several hundred milliseconds required for conscious awareness. By the time you consciously feel afraid, your body has already begun its fear response. Other structures in the limbic system handle different emotions. The insula processes disgust, keeping you away from contamination. The anterior cingulate cortex registers social pain, motivating connection and discouraging rejection. The nucleus accumbens responds to reward, driving approach behavior. These ancient circuits, shared with other mammals, form the emotional foundation of your mental life. The construction of feeling. But emotions aren't just ancient limbic responses. Human emotions are more complex, involving cortical areas that add meaning, context, and regulation. What you experience as an emotion is actually a construction, your brain's interpretation of bodily sensations in light of your current situation, past experiences, and cultural learning. Consider a pounding heart and rapid breathing. In one context, this feels like fear. In another, excitement. During exercise, you barely notice it emotionally. The bodily sensations are similar, but your brain constructs different emotional experiences based on context. Lisa Feldman Barrett's theory of constructed emotion pushes this idea further. Emotions aren't discrete, universal reactions that happen to you. Instead, your brain constantly predicts what your bodily sensations mean based on past experience, and these predictions become your emotional experience. You don't detect fear and then feel it, you construct the experience of fear from ambiguous internal sensations and situational cues. This explains why emotions can be so variable and context-dependent. The same emotion feels different in different circumstances because it's being constructed differently. It also explains how culture shapes emotions. Different cultures teach different ways of interpreting and categorizing internal sensations, creating genuinely different emotional experiences. The basic emotions debate. Are there basic, universal emotions shared by all humans? Paul Ekman's research suggested 6: happiness, sadness, fear, anger, surprise, and disgust. Studies showed that people across cultures can recognize these emotions in facial expressions, suggesting they're innate rather than learned. But the universality claim has been challenged. While some emotional expressions are widely recognized, others vary significantly across cultures.
Moreover, people experience many emotions that don't fit the basic 6: contempt, pride, shame, guilt, awe, love, jealousy, envy, gratitude, and countless subtle variations and blends. Some researchers propose dimensional models instead. All emotions vary along a few dimensions like valence, pleasant, unpleasant, and arousal, high, low energy. Fear is unpleasant plus high arousal. Contentment is pleasant plus low arousal. Anger is unpleasant plus high arousal, similar to fear but with different action tendency, approach versus escape. The truth may be that both models capture something real. We may have a small number of basic affect programs, innate bodily response patterns, that culture and learning elaborate into the rich variety of emotional experiences. The bodily feeling of basic fear is universal, but what counts as fear-worthy and how you interpret and express fear varies enormously. The bodily basis of emotion. Whatever their ultimate nature, emotions are deeply embodied. Your gut feelings are literally that, sensations from your gut and heart, lungs, muscles, skin that your brain interprets emotionally. The vagus nerve carries signals from your organs to your brain, providing constant updates about your internal state that color your emotional experience.
This is why bodily interventions can change emotions. Slow, deep breathing activates the parasympathetic nervous system and reduces anxiety, not through causative thinking, but through direct physiological pathways. Regular exercise improves mood partly through neurotransmitter changes, but also by creating bodily sensations of vitality and capability. Even holding your body in certain postures, standing upright versus slumped, influences emotional state. The enteric nervous system in your gut, sometimes called the second brain, contains 500 million neurons and produces 95% of your serotonin. Gut bacteria influence this system, which is why emerging research links gut health to mental health. Your emotional life isn't just in your skull, it's distributed throughout your body. Emotional intelligence. Not all emotions feel intelligent. Sometimes you're angry at someone who doesn't deserve it, afraid of things that aren't dangerous, or happy about something you know you shouldn't want. Emotions evolved for ancestral environments that don't match modern life, leading to frequent mismatch. Emotional intelligence involves understanding this system well enough to work with it rather than being controlled by it. This doesn't mean suppressing emotions. That rarely works and often backfires. Instead, it means recognizing emotions, developing granular awareness of what you're feeling. People who can make fine distinctions, I'm anxious, not just generally upset, navigate emotions more effectively than those with simpler categories. Understanding triggers. Learning what typically triggers your emotions, including subtle cues. You might notice that hunger makes you irritable, loneliness makes you anxious, or fatigue makes you pessimistic. Accepting emotions. Allowing yourself to feel without immediately judging or trying to change emotions. Paradoxically, acceptance often reduces emotional intensity more than suppression does. Regulating responses. Choosing how to act on emotions rather than being driven by them. You can feel angry and choose not to lash out. You can feel afraid and still move forward. Reappraising situations. Changing how you interpret situations to change emotional responses. Seeing a challenge as opportunity rather than threat shifts anxiety toward excitement. The social nature of emotions. Humans are intensely social, and many emotions are fundamentally social. Shame and guilt regulate social behavior by making violations feel bad. Pride and gratitude strengthen social bonds. Love creates commitment. Jealousy guards relationships. Anger responds to perceived injustice or boundary violations. These social emotions require sophisticated cognitive abilities. You need to model others' mental states, understand social norms, anticipate others' reactions, and care about your social standing. This is why social emotions develop later in childhood than basic emotions and depend on more recently evolved brain regions like the prefrontal cortex. Social emotions also spread between people through emotional contagion.
You unconsciously mimic others' facial expressions, postures, and tone, which triggers corresponding emotions in you. Spend time with anxious people and you become more anxious. Surround yourself with joyful people and your mood lifts. This is why emotional climate matters so much in families, workplaces, and communities. Mirror neurons, brain cells that fire both when you perform an action and when you see others perform it, may underlie empathy. Watching someone suffer activates some of the same neural circuits that activate when you suffer, creating a literal resonance with others' emotional states. This neural empathy system is the foundation of moral concern and pro-social behavior. When emotions go wrong, depression suppresses positive emotions while amplifying negative ones. The world looks gray because your brain's reward and pleasure systems aren't responding normally. This isn't weakness or pessimistic thinking, it's a physiological state where the neural circuits that generate positive emotion aren't functioning properly. Anxiety disorders involve an overactive threat detection system.
Your amygdala treats ambiguous situations as dangerous, generating persistent fear and worry. Again, this isn't irrational fear, but a sensitized system making good faith errors about danger levels. Bipolar disorder involves wild swings between emotional extremes, depressive lows and manic highs. Mood regulation systems that normally maintain emotional homeostasis fail, creating uncontrolled oscillations. Borderline personality disorder involves intense, unstable emotions and difficulty regulating them. Small triggers produce overwhelming emotional responses, and the system takes much longer than normal to return to baseline. Understanding these as brain-based emotional dysregulation rather than character flaws or choices is crucial. People with these conditions aren't choosing to feel this way, any more than people with diabetes choose to have blood sugar regulation problems. Treatment targets the underlying neural systems through medication, therapy, or both. The hidden rationality of emotions. Emotions often seem irrational. Overreactions, inappropriate responses, feelings that don't match circumstances. But most emotions make sense once you understand what they're responding to, even if that response isn't optimal for your current situation. Your anger at being cut off in traffic seems disproportionate, no real harm occurred. But your emotional system evolved in small groups where disrespect signaled real danger and where retaliation maintained status. The anger makes evolutionary sense even if it's not helpful on the highway. Your anxiety about social judgment seems excessive. Who cares what strangers think? But your ancestors' survival depended on social acceptance. Ostracism could mean death. Your nervous system still treats social rejection as a serious threat because for most of human history it was. Even seemingly irrational guilt or shame often reflects internalized values, social conditioning, or past experiences that shaped your emotional responses. The feeling isn't arbitrary, it follows from how your emotional system learned to respond to similar situations. This doesn't mean all emotional responses are appropriate or should be followed, but it means they deserve understanding rather than dismissal. Each emotion is your system's attempt to protect you, connect you, or guide you, even if the attempt misses the mark. Cultivating emotional wisdom. Wisdom about emotions involves neither suppressing them, impossible and harmful, nor blindly following them, often unwise. Instead, emotional wisdom means treating emotions as valuable signals that provide information without necessarily dictating action. When you feel angry, that's information that something violated your values or boundaries. You don't have to act on the anger, but you shouldn't ignore the signal either. When you feel anxious, that's information that your system perceives potential threat. The threat might be real or imagined, but the feeling deserves attention.
You can develop emotional wisdom through several practices. Mindfulness meditation increases awareness of emotions as they arise and strengthens your ability to observe them without being overwhelmed. Therapy helps you understand your emotional patterns and learn healthier responses. Journaling creates space for emotional processing and pattern recognition. Physical self-care maintains the bodily foundation of emotional health. Social connection provides co-regulation. Others help regulate your emotional state through their presence and support. The goal isn't perfect emotional control. You're not a robot, and emotions are part of what makes you human. The goal is partnership with your emotional system, understanding its signals, appreciating its purposes, and gently guiding it toward responses that serve your values and well-being.
The dark basement, the unconscious mind. Imagine your mind as an iceberg. The tip above water, brilliant, visible, accessible, is your conscious awareness. But this represents perhaps 5% of your mental life. Below the surface lies the vast bulk, the unconscious mind, processing information, storing memories, harboring desires, running habits, all beyond your direct awareness. This unconscious region isn't just idle storage. It actively shapes your perceptions, drives your behaviors, influences your decisions, and constructs much of your emotional life. You are, in a very real sense, controlled by processes you cannot see and often cannot access. Understanding the unconscious mind means confronting an uncomfortable truth. You are not the author of your own life in the way you imagine. Much of what feels like conscious choice is actually unconscious reaction. Much of what you think you know about yourself is confabulation. You're a stranger to yourself in ways that would be terrifying if you fully appreciated them. The discovery of the unconscious. The unconscious mind wasn't always obvious. For millennia, people assumed they had direct access to their own thoughts and motives. If you didn't know why you did something, you either hadn't thought about it carefully enough or were being dishonest. Sigmund Freud revolutionized this understanding by proposing that unconscious processes weren't just pre-conscious, things you could bring to awareness with effort, but truly unconscious, things actively kept from awareness by psychological defenses. According to Freud, the unconscious contained repressed desires, traumatic memories, and primitive drives that consciousness found unacceptable. Freud's specific theories, the Oedipus complex, penis envy, everything relating to sex and aggression, are largely rejected by modern psychology. But his core insight was correct. The unconscious exists, it's powerful, and it influences behavior in ways we don't recognize. Modern cognitive science has confirmed and expanded this insight. Research shows that unconscious processing handles most of the brain's work. Consciousness is expensive energetically, so the brain delegates as much as possible to efficient unconscious systems. You consciously experience only the summary before knowing why, as unconscious evaluation triggers emotional responses. Decision preparation. Studies show that unconscious activity predicts decisions before conscious awareness of deciding. Your unconscious mind weighs options and prepares responses that consciousness later claims as deliberate choices. Problem solving. The unconscious continues working on problems even when you're not consciously thinking about them. Solutions arrive seemingly from nowhere, actually from unconscious processing. Memory storage and retrieval. Vast amounts of information are stored unconsciously, retrieved only when relevant cues trigger them. Most of what you know isn't in consciousness right now, but remains accessible unconsciously. Implicit memory and priming. You have memories you don't know you have. This sounds paradoxical, but reflects an important distinction between explicit memory, conscious recollection, and implicit memory, unconscious influence of past experience. Someone with amnesia from brain damage might not remember meeting you, no explicit memory, but still respond to you more warmly than to strangers, implicit memory.
and stereotypes that operate automatically without conscious awareness or endorsement. Someone can consciously believe in equality while unconsciously harboring biases about race, gender, age, or other categories. These biases influence snap judgments, gut feelings, and intuitions even when they contradict explicitly held values. A person judging job applications might unconsciously favor candidates with certain names. A doctor might unconsciously provide different care based on patient demographics. Implicit bias tests, like the implicit association test, reveal these unconscious associations by measuring reaction times. Most people show some implicit biases, often ones they consciously reject. This doesn't mean people are secretly bigoted. It means their unconscious minds have absorbed cultural patterns through exposure, stereotypes in media, statistical patterns in their environment, associations learned in childhood. You cannot eliminate unconscious biases through willpower alone. They operate at a level below conscious control. But you can implement procedures that prevent biases from influencing important decisions. Using blind review processes, relying on structured criteria, checking decisions against potential bias patterns. The unconscious and dreams. Freud believed dreams were the royal road to the unconscious, symbolic expressions of repressed desires and conflicts. While his specific interpretations seem far-fetched today, the basic idea that dreams reveal unconscious processing has support. During REM sleep, the brain processes memories, consolidates learning, and explores emotional concerns. Dreams often feature concerns that occupy your unconscious mind, worries about work, relationship anxieties, unresolved conflicts. The bizarre, illogical nature of dreams may reflect how the unconscious mind processes information differently than conscious thought, through association and emotion rather than logic and language. Some researchers propose that dreams simulate threatening or challenging situations, allowing your brain to practice responses. Others suggest dreams integrate new experiences with existing knowledge, weaving them into their mental models. Whatever their function, dreams offer a window into unconscious processing that happens continuously beneath awareness. Defense mechanisms. The unconscious mind protects you from information or feelings that threaten your psychological stability. These defense mechanisms operate automatically, shaping how you perceive reality to maintain emotional equilibrium. Repression pushes painful memories or desires out of awareness. You forget traumatic experiences or deny having feelings you find unacceptable. Projection attributes your own unacceptable feelings to others. You're angry but perceive others as angry at you. You're attracted to someone inappropriate and believe they're trying to seduce you. Rationalization creates reasonable-sounding explanations for behavior actually driven by unacceptable motives. You claim you work long hours for professional development when you're actually avoiding home problems. Denial simply refuses to acknowledge uncomfortable reality. You minimize serious problems, dismiss obvious warning signs, or maintain beliefs despite contradicting evidence. These mechanisms aren't deliberate lies. You genuinely believe your rationalizations and denials because the unconscious mind has reshaped your perception to protect you. This makes defense mechanisms both protective, reducing anxiety, and problematic, distorting reality. The adaptive unconscious. Not all unconscious processing is defensive or problematic.
Timothy Wilson's research on the adaptive unconscious emphasizes its positive functions. Your unconscious mind quickly evaluates situations, providing gut feelings that guide behavior before detailed conscious analysis finishes. These intuitions, while sometimes wrong, are often right and nearly always fast. Manages complex skills, letting you perform sophisticated behaviors smoothly without conscious monitoring. Expert performance in sports, music, or any skilled domain relies on unconscious mastery. regulates basic drives, managing hunger, thirst, temperature, energy balance, and other homeostatic functions without conscious attention. Monitors social cues, tracking facial expressions, tone of voice, body language, detecting subtle signals that conscious attention might miss. The adaptive unconscious is a remarkable achievement of evolution, a sophisticated information processing system that handles routine and urgent tasks efficiently, freeing consciousness for novel problems requiring flexible thinking. The limits of introspection. If so much happens unconsciously, how well can you know yourself through introspection? The answer is, not as well as you think. When you explain your own behavior, why you chose that career, why you're attracted to that person, why you're in a bad mood, you're often confabulating. Your conscious mind doesn't have access to the actual unconscious processes driving behavior, so it invents plausible-sounding explanations based on cultural narratives and self-concepts. Research demonstrates this repeatedly. People explain their choices based on factors that demonstrably didn't influence them, while ignoring factors that did. People claim motivations that couldn't have been operating. People feel certain about memories that are provably false. This doesn't mean introspection is worthless. You do have privileged access to your conscious experiences. You know what you're feeling and thinking right now better than anyone else. But you don't have privileged access to the causes of those experiences. For that, you're in the same position as an external observer, making educated guesses based on visible behavior and outcomes. Working with your unconscious. You cannot directly control your unconscious mind, but you can influence it indirectly. Mindfulness meditation increases awareness of unconscious processes as they bubble up to consciousness. You notice patterns, triggers, and reactions you previously missed. Therapy helps make the unconscious conscious by exploring feelings, memories, and patterns beneath your everyday awareness. Talking through experiences with a skilled guide reveals connections and motivations you couldn't access alone. Behavioral experiments reveal unconscious patterns through their effects. If you're unsure why you avoid certain situations, deliberately approaching them teaches you about unconscious fears or beliefs. Environmental design shapes unconscious responses by changing what you're exposed to. Remove temptations rather than relying on willpower. Create cues for desired behaviors. Structure your environment to make good choices automatic. Habit formation programs your unconscious mind with desired patterns through repetition. Once established, habits run automatically, enlisting unconscious systems to support your conscious goals. The key is working with your unconscious rather than against it. Fighting unconscious impulses with willpower alone usually fails, because willpower is a limited conscious resource, while unconscious patterns operate constantly and effortlessly. Better to understand what drives those patterns and gently reshape them over time. The integrated mind. The division between conscious and unconscious isn't absolute. Information flows both directions, with conscious thoughts influencing unconscious processing and unconscious processes shaping consciousness. You're not two separate systems, but one integrated mind, with both conscious and unconscious aspects.
Understanding this integration means recognizing consciousness is the tip of a vast mental iceberg, representing a tiny fraction of mental activity. Most of your behavior is driven by processes you cannot see and often cannot access. Your explanations for your own behavior are often post hoc rationalizations rather than accurate reports of actual causes. Unconscious processes are generally adaptive but can produce biases, errors, and problematic patterns. Working with your unconscious mind requires indirect strategies that respect its autonomy while gently shaping its patterns. The unconscious mind is not your enemy. It's the hard-working machinery that lets consciousness exist in the first place. But it's also not perfectly aligned with your conscious goals and values. The human condition involves negotiating between conscious intentions and unconscious impulses, explicit values and implicit biases, what you want to want and what you actually want. That negotiation is the work of a lifetime, and it begins with recognizing that the dark basement of your unconscious mind is far larger, more active, and more influential than the brightly lit rooms of consciousness where you spend your subjective life.
The inner battlefield. Reason versus emotion. You pride yourself on being reasonable. You make decisions based on facts, not feelings. You follow logic, not impulse. You're not like those emotional people who let their feelings cloud their judgment. Except you are. Everyone is. The belief that reason and emotion are separate systems and that good decisions come from reason overruling emotion is one of the most persistent myths about the human mind. The truth is far more interesting. Reason and emotion are deeply intertwined. You need both for good decisions, and the interplay between them creates much of the drama of human mental life. Understanding this inner battlefield means recognizing that you're always fighting on multiple fronts at once, with different parts of your brain advocating for different responses, and the outcome of these conflicts determines your behavior far more than any conscious, rational deliberation. The dual process mind. Psychologists distinguish between two types of thinking, sometimes called System 1 and System 2. System 1 is fast, automatic, emotional, and unconscious. It operates through pattern recognition, generating instant gut reactions based on past experience. When you immediately like or dislike someone, know a situation feels wrong, or instantly solve simple problems, System 1 is at work. System 2 is slow, deliberate, logical, and conscious. It handles complex calculations, weighs evidence, considers multiple perspectives, and engages in abstract reasoning. When you work through a difficult problem, compare pros and cons, or force yourself to see another viewpoint, System 2 is engaged. You might assume System 2 is higher and better, the rational mind that should rule over emotional System 1. But this hierarchy is misleading. Both systems are essential, and System 1 often makes better decisions than System 2, especially in domains with rich experience. Moreover, System 2 isn't as rational as it seems. It often just rationalizes what System 1 has already decided, constructing logical-sounding arguments for emotional conclusions. Your reasoning is frequently in service to your feelings rather than correcting them. The myth of pure reason. The philosopher David Hume wrote that reason is and ought only to be the slave of the passions. This wasn't a complaint, but an observation about how minds actually work. Reason doesn't set goals or values, emotion does. Reason figures out how to achieve goals that emotion has established. This became dramatically clear from neuroscience research on people with damage to emotional processing regions. Antonio Damasio studied patients with lesions in the ventromedial prefrontal cortex, a region that integrates emotion into decision-making. These patients retained full reasoning ability. They could solve logic problems, do math, understand hypothetical scenarios, but they couldn't make good real-world decisions. One patient spent half an hour deliberating about when to schedule an appointment, weighing countless factors logically, without feeling drawn toward any option. Another made terrible financial and personal decisions despite understanding the logical consequences. Without emotional input, pure reason was paralyzed or foolish. This suggests that emotions aren't obstacles to good decisions, they're necessary ingredients. Emotions provide the values and priorities that give decision-making direction. They flag what matters. They generate the somatic markers, gut feelings, that guide choice when logic alone is insufficient. How emotion shapes reasoning. Far from being separate systems, emotion and reason constantly interact. Emotion focuses attention. You pay attention to what feels important.
Anxiety directs attention toward threats. Desire directs attention toward opportunities. Without emotional signals highlighting what matters, reason would be overwhelmed by irrelevant information. Emotion motivates reasoning. You reason about things you care about. Pure intellectual curiosity exists but is weak compared to emotionally charged concerns. The problems you choose to think about, the questions you pursue, the arguments you find compelling, all are shaped by emotional investment. Emotion provides intuition. When facing complex decisions with incomplete information, gut feelings often guide you better than explicit analysis.
This isn't mystical. It's unconscious emotional systems processing subtle cues and past experience patterns faster than conscious reasoning can track. Emotion evaluates outcomes. Reason can calculate expected utility, but emotion determines what counts as utility. Something is valuable because it feels good, meaningful, important, emotional assessments that can't be derived from pure logic. The interplay goes the other direction too. Reason regulates emotion. You can reinterpret situations to change emotional responses. You can anticipate emotional consequences to guide behavior. You can understand your emotions better through reasoning about their causes and patterns. The best decisions use both systems in concert: emotion to provide values and intuitions, reason to check those intuitions against evidence and consider long-term consequences. The rationalization machine. One of reason's less noble functions is rationalization, generating convincing explanations for decisions already made emotionally. Your brain excels at this, constructing logical-sounding justifications so quickly that you genuinely believe you reasoned your way to conclusions. Social psychologist Jonathan Haidt compares moral reasoning to a lawyer defending a client. The emotional intuition, System 1, instantly delivers a verdict. This feels right or wrong. Then reasoning, System 2, constructs arguments justifying that verdict. You rarely reason your way to moral conclusions. You feel your way there and then rationalize. This happens constantly outside morality too. You're attracted to someone and construct reasons why they're perfect for you, ignoring contradicting evidence. You want to buy something and generate justifications for the purchase, exaggerating benefits, minimizing costs. You dislike a political candidate and find their every statement objectionable, while charitably interpreting your preferred candidate's similar statements. Confirmation bias, the tendency to seek evidence supporting existing beliefs, is rationalization in action. Your emotional system 1 has already decided what's true. Your rational system 2 then selectively gathers evidence confirming that conclusion while dismissing contradicting evidence as flawed, biased, or irrelevant. This doesn't mean you're stupid or dishonest. It means your brain works like everyone else's, using reason as a tool to support emotionally grounded positions, rather than as an impartial arbiter of truth. When emotions override reason. Sometimes emotional responses overwhelm rational judgment entirely. You know you shouldn't lash out in anger, but you do. You know you should study instead of binge-watching, but the immediate pleasure trumps future benefits. You know your fear is irrational, but you can't overcome it through logic alone. This happens because emotional systems evolved earlier and operate faster than rational systems. The amygdala triggers fear responses in milliseconds, while the prefrontal cortex needs hundreds of milliseconds to engage rational evaluation. By the time reason arrives on the scene, emotion has already seized control. Strong emotions also literally impair reasoning. High stress reduces prefrontal cortex function, while amplifying amygdala activity. The brain shifts from thoughtful mode to reactive mode. This made evolutionary sense for immediate threats, but backfires for modern stressors that require careful thinking. Fatigue, hunger, and depleted willpower also tip the balance toward emotional responding.
Your prefrontal cortex is expensive to run, energetically speaking. When resources are low, emotional shortcuts dominate. This is why you make worse decisions when tired, why diets fail late in the day when willpower is exhausted, why heated arguments spiral when both parties are emotionally drained. When emotions distort reason. The opposite problem occurs when reason tries to suppress or deny emotions. You tell yourself you shouldn't feel hurt by criticism, anxious about a presentation, or excited about a risky opportunity. You apply logical arguments. There's no reason to be nervous. Logically, I should be over this by now. It's irrational to feel this way. But emotions don't respond to logical arguments about whether they should exist. They arise from unconscious evaluations of situations based on past experience, current physiological state, and innate predispositions.
You can't think your way out of fear any more than you can think your way out of hunger. Worse, attempting to suppress emotions often intensifies them. Trying not to think about something makes it more likely to surface, the white bear effect. Denying your feelings doesn't make them go away, it just makes you less aware of how they're influencing you. Emotional suppression also has physical costs. Studies show that chronic emotion suppression is linked to higher blood pressure, weakened immune function, increased anxiety, and relationship problems. Emotions are energy. Suppressing them requires constant effort that depletes resources and creates physiological strain. The intelligence of emotion. Given all this, why do we still talk about emotional intelligence as something separate from regular intelligence? Because navigating emotions skillfully, your own and others, requires specific competencies that general reasoning ability doesn't guarantee. Emotional intelligence includes self-awareness, recognizing what you're feeling and why. Many people experience emotions as undifferentiated, upset, or stressed, without distinguishing anxiety from anger, sadness from fatigue, or fear from excitement. Self-regulation, managing emotional responses without suppressing them. This means acknowledging feelings while choosing how to act, using techniques like reappraisal, distraction, or expression in appropriate contexts. Motivation, using emotions to sustain effort towards goals. Emotionally intelligent people harness enthusiasm, connect with their values, and maintain emotional investment in long-term objectives. Empathy, accurately perceiving others' emotions and taking their perspective. This requires both reading emotional cues and imagining others' internal states. Social skills, navigating interpersonal situations effectively by managing emotions in social contexts, resolving conflicts, building rapport, inspiring others, collaborating despite differences. High IQ doesn't guarantee high EQ. Brilliant people can be emotionally obtuse, while some with modest analytical abilities navigate social and emotional situations brilliantly. The best outcomes come from combining both. The narrative self. The conflict between reason and emotion creates the stories you tell about yourself. You construct a narrative identity, a coherent story explaining who you are, why you do what you do, and what your life means. This narrative integrates rational self-understanding with emotional experiences. But the narrative is always partly fiction. It emphasizes certain experiences while downplaying others. It imposes coherence on what was actually chaotic. It finds meaning in what might have been random. It constructs a consistent self from what is actually a collection of shifting states and conflicting impulses. The narrator of this story is primarily System 2, rational, verbal, conscious. It interprets the outputs of System 1, emotional, intuitive, unconscious, and weaves them into comprehensible narrative.
When the two systems conflict, the narrative becomes strained. I want this, but I shouldn't. I know better, but I did it anyway. That wasn't really me. Understanding that you contain multitudes, different systems with different values, different parts advocating for different choices, can paradoxically create more self-acceptance. You're not weak when emotion overrides reason, nor cold when reason overrides emotion. You're simply a complex system where different processes compete for control, and the outcome varies by situation. Practical wisdom. So how should you navigate the battlefield between reason and emotion? Some practical principles. Recognize you need both. Don't privilege reason over emotion or vice versa. Good decisions require both emotional wisdom, knowing what matters, and rational analysis, understanding consequences. Use emotion as data. When you feel something strongly, treat it as important information, even if you don't immediately understand it or agree with it. Ask, what is this emotion telling me about this situation? Give reason time. Your initial emotional response is fast but not always right. When possible, delay important decisions until System 2 has time to engage. Sleep on it. Talk it through. Consider alternatives. Know your vulnerabilities. Everyone has domains where emotion reliably overwhelms reason, or vice versa.
Identify yours and build accountability partners, automated decisions, environmental design to compensate. Practice emotional regulation. Learn techniques that help you work with emotions rather than against them. Deep breathing, reappraisal, acceptance, expression in safe contexts. Stay humble. Remember that your reasoning is often rationalization. Hold your conclusions lightly. Stay open to evidence that contradicts your comfortable beliefs. Cultivate wise emotions. Through experience, reflection, and deliberate practice, you can gradually train your emotional responses to be more aligned with your values. Your intuitions can become wiser over time. The goal isn't to let reason rule emotion or emotion rule reason. The goal is integration, bringing these systems into better cooperation so they inform rather than sabotage each other. This is the work of psychological maturity, and it never fully finishes because new situations continue testing the balance. You are not a unified rational agent. You're a parliament of competing interests, where emotion and reason represent different constituencies, each with legitimate concerns, and wisdom lies in finding workable compromises that let you live well despite the eternal conflict. between visual and auditory information. Your brain automatically integrates information across modalities. that further disrupt memory consolidation, or you wake up fully and immediately engage with waking reality, which overwrites the fragile dream memory. Some people recall dreams more than others. Dream recall increases when you wake during or immediately after REM, when you have strong interest in dreams, when you keep dream journals, which trains recall, and when sleep is disrupted, creating more transitions from REM to waking. Involved in REM sleep. Alcohol and sleeping pills suppress REM initially, but REM rebounds when they wear off.
Critical thinking. Education can, though doesn't always, teach you to examine your own thinking, to recognize biases, evaluate arguments, culture. Christians see Jesus, Hindus see Yamraj, god of death. This suggests psychological construction rather than objective spiritual experience. Temporal distortion. Subjective